and thank you for joining us for Contemporary Art Taos 2020, the Artist Interview Series. This program consists of short interviews with all of our featured artists in this exhibition that will take place twice a month and be posted on Facebook Live. I'm Nicole, Curator of Exhibitions and Collections here at the Harwood Museum of Art, and joining me today is Kathleen Brennan. Welcome, Kathleen. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you.
Good. So let's talk about the work that's featured in this exhibition, Last Supper Stew. Can you tell us what takes place in this documentary?
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Nicole. Well, this documentary is about a woman who has decided after a very long and happy life to voluntarily stop eating and drinking. And this is known as VSED in the greater world, VSED. It's a short film, 9.5 minutes, and it just goes through the process of her final days. She starts on April 1st. She dies on April 12th of 2019, and this is a glimpse into her journey.
So in this piece, you take us into a space that confronts the realities of our mortality, which is not a commonly discussed thing or a comfortable place for a lot of us. What was the process of creating this like, especially since you had a personal relationship with Cindy? It seems very brave that you would confront that on such personal terms.
Well, the mask. You know, it was hard. There's no doubt about it. And knowing her and the relationship that we had, I was her person, as she called me. I took care of a lot of all her financial things and some of her big decisions that she had to make. She called me the daughter she never wanted. She was widowed and had no children. And she had a great sense of humor. But I photographed and videotaped her in the 10 years that I knew her. She was an artist herself. So she was open to the idea. At first she was like, do we have to do this? And I said, no, but she was very much an advocate for that right to die. And so she agreed, yes, let's do this. And that's how it happened.
Incredible. Well, thank you for sharing that with us. As you mentioned, there are actually wonderful moments in this work. There's a lot of levity. She always seems to have a good attitude. She's listening to Janis Joplin. She's cracking jokes. She's laughing. It was one of the most striking parts of the video for me, something I certainly didn't expect knowing the subject matter. Tell us about your decision to include that levity.
Well, that's who Cynthia was. That's the bottom line about that. And you know, dying, we all are so afraid, or most of us are. And we see it as a very sad, very hard, very difficult process. And for many people it is. It's a hard enough subject as it is. So I didn't want to make it too heavy. And I think it gets the message across well enough. But her levity and her humor, it's who she was. And it's how she progressed through those days. Certainly there were hard moments. Certainly there were times when she just wanted it to be over with. But she still, to the core, was Cynthia. And even the moment of her death was just so Cynthia, you know. I don't know what else to say about it, yeah.
So a lot of your other work looks at the forces of nature in relation to the influence of humans. You've done really beautiful work on fire, drought, dust storms. How does this look at the human body fit into that study for you?
Well, there's no difference for me, really. It's all about the cycle of life. It's about life and death. We come into life, we live our life, we die. It's no different than the roses in our garden. So what's shifted for me? Well, also, my brother died over 30 years ago from cancer at a very young man. And that sort of broke my heart open to compassion around dying and what it meant for people. And I've been around a lot of people who've died. So this was not unique for me. In that regard, it was unique that I'd never been with somebody who actively wanted to die. Whereas all the other ones, everybody's trying to hold on to life. And here Cynthia was letting go of life. So But it's the same thing that happens in the forest. You know, the forest gets overcrowded, it gets disease, it needs to die, it needs fire, it needs to be regenerated. And so to me, there's no difference. It's still that continuous cycle of life and death. But again, we're so afraid of that part. And so I think this is it's in your face, but it's also a gentle way of introducing the subject that, you know, we have a right to live and we have a right to die when it's time.
That's a great lead in to my next question. An unspoken conversation in this work is the right to die movement, as it's known in America. Cindy's decision to take her own life via starvation occurs because there is no legal medical decision to end your life in many states in this country, even in the face of chronic pain or disease. Do you want that conversation to come out of viewing this?
Well, I think it does. I think it's stated right from the front what this is about. So there's, you know, you could walk away if you know that Cynthia is voluntarily stopping eating and drinking over the next 12 days. So, you know, the conversation is there. It's just not banging you over the head. And I do think it's an important conversation. I also think you use the word starvation, but Cynthia did not die of starvation. She died of dehydration. And this is what happens just, again, in nature, because I observe nature a lot. You know, when something dies, the first thing that leaves is the moisture. And we are 95% or 90% water in our body. So eating is not the problem. After a day or two of not eating, you don't care. She didn't care about not eating. It's the drinking, it's the hydration that's difficult. And so I think it is an important conversation. I think that Cynthia was, you know, for over 40 years, she talked about when it was time for her to go, she was going to go. And when I signed up to help her, we had very long conversations about this. And I, even though I don't think I could do this myself, I don't know. I knew that being who I am and how I've helped other people make the transition to death, I said, I'll do this with you. And, you know, it was 10 years later, but when she told me, even though I was shocked and not ready myself, she was ready. I felt very strong that this was my commitment. And I had no problem carrying out that commitment with her.
Incredible. So just moments before we started recording, you told me the story of how you met her, which I would love to have you share, especially because it has some roots in the Harwood.
It does indeed. So I met Cynthia in 2011. And there was a show here at the Harwood curated by Brennan called Black Mountain College and the New Mexico Connection. And the headliner was Oli Savonin, who was a major artist and had come here through the Wurlitzer and lived here for many years and then moved on to New York. But Cynthia went to Black Mountain College, and she married a man, Jorge Fick, who also went to Black Mountain College. And 4 of those artists, and there was this big connection between North Carolina and New Mexico, and it ended up that 4 artists ended up taking a permanent residency here in Taos. And so when Gina was putting together this show, she said to me, I'd really love it if you would go and interview these 4 artists and find out get their oral history about New Mexico and Black Mountain. So that's how I met Cynthia. I called her up and said who I was. I wanted to do this, you know, for the museum. And she said, great. And honestly, from the moment we met, it's like we just fell in love. She reminded me of my Irish grandpa in some ways, with her sense of humor. I loved that she was an artist and a poet, and we just really clicked. And it was just within a couple of months of meeting her that she asked me, you know, will you do this for me? So that's how I met her.
Wow, what a great Taos story.
Yeah, it is.
So this exhibition was limited to artists from Taos or with deep roots in the area. Will you tell us about your personal relationship to Taos?
Well, let's see. I'm originally from the East Coast, and I came to New Mexico in the early 70s to go to UNM in Albuquerque, and I graduated there with a fine arts degree in photography. And after living in Albuquerque for a while, I migrated to Colorado for a number of years, but I knew that New Mexico was my home. And when I was ready to leave Colorado, because I felt like my roots were getting too deep, I said, if I don't leave now, I'm never going to get out of here. I was in Denver. And so I traveled throughout the state, and Taos was the place I decided to come. And once I got here, I realized this was my forever home. And I'm very happy. And especially now with COVID, I must say I'm really grateful to be here in Taos.
Absolutely. And I think this work is particularly poignant right now with all of us dealing with the coronavirus and death all around us, and how we confront what's happening right now.
How we confront what's happening. And that death, even though we don't want it to happen or it can be difficult, it's also, Cynthia had a happy death. She had a happy life, she had a good life, and she really had a good death. And not many people do, so, yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Kathleen, and thank you for coming. Be sure to stay tuned on Facebook Live for our next interview series on January 6th with Sarah Stoller. Have a good night.
Thanks.